Steve Harvey, known for his humor, wisdom, and unforgettable presence on television, recently found himself in a deeply emotional moment that left both him and the audience in tears. The seasoned host, who has spent years inspiring others with his words and uplifting stories, was brought to tears himself, this time by a heartfelt message from an unexpected source: Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the transitional president of Burkina Faso. It happened during a segment that started out like any other. Steve was hosting a conversation about leadership, unity, and the importance of integrity in modern times. The show had taken a more reflective turn in recent weeks, touching on the powerful impact of authentic leadership. And that's when the message from Ibrahim Traoré was introduced. At first, Steve appeared intrigued, perhaps expecting a polite diplomatic note or a general message of goodwill. But what followed went far beyond pleasantries. Ibrahim Traoré's message, delivered through a video, was humble yet powerful. He began by expressing his admiration for Steve Harvey, not for his fame or fortune, but for his unwavering commitment to truth, dignity, and speaking up for his people. Traoré spoke from the heart, referencing moments when Steve had used his platform to defend the voiceless, to uplift those facing struggle, and to never compromise his values, even in the face of criticism. The young African leader didn't just praise Steve's career. He tied Steve's mission to something larger, a shared fight for dignity, freedom, and empowerment. He spoke about how voices like Steve's give hope to a generation of Africans reclaiming their future, resisting exploitation, and redefining leadership with honor. Traoré said, "When our people hear you speak, they hear strength. They hear someone who hasn't forgotten where he came from. That is power." As the message continued, Steve's demeanor began to shift. The studio grew quiet. The audience could sense something profound was happening. Steve's eyes welled up with tears. He wasn't crying because of sadness, but because of recognition. Recognition that his words, his journey, his battles, had meant something far beyond the borders of the United States. Recognition that someone fighting for justice on the other side of the world had drawn strength from him. Traoré ended his message with a simple but deeply moving statement. "Brother Steve, your voice reaches far. Your pain has been our pain. Your victories have been our encouragement. And from the heart of Africa, we thank you. You are not alone." By the time the screen faded to black, Steve could barely speak. He sat silently, visibly moved, a tear sliding down his cheek. The audience stood, offering a quiet but powerful round of applause, not just for Steve, but for the powerful moment of unity they had just witnessed. Eventually, Steve gathered himself. Voice trembling, he said, "Man, you don't know. You don't know what that means to me. To have someone like that fighting for his people take a moment to speak life into me, that's different. That's God. That's connection. That's love." He went on to share how over the years he had faced ridicule, pressure, and even isolation for speaking out on issues others avoided. But this message reminded him why he kept going. Sometimes you wonder if what you say even matters, and then God sends a message like this to say it does. In that moment, Steve Harvey wasn't just a talk show host. He was a brother, a father, a fighter, a servant of purpose. And Ibrahim Traoré wasn't just a president. He was a messenger, a reminder that leadership rooted in sincerity and respect still moves mountains. This was more than just an emotional moment on TV. It was a bridge between continents, between cultures, between two men who've never met, but who walk parallel paths of impact. It was a lesson in gratitude, in legacy, and in the power of spoken truth. And as the segment ended, Steve left the audience with a message of his own. If you ever wonder whether what you do matters, it does. Keep going. Somebody's watching. Somebody's listening. And somebody's healing. It was a moment none of us will forget. Steve Harvey in tears, not out of sorrow, but out of honor. And the world was reminded once again that real leadership speaks to the soul. Just as the audience was beginning to settle from the emotion of that powerful moment, Steve Harvey shared another deeply personal story, one that further demonstrated the invisible threads that connect people across borders, cultures, and time. With a steadying breath, Steve looked out at the audience and began. "You know," he said, "since we're talking about purpose, I want to share something that happened to me years ago. Something I never talked about on this stage before." He paused for a moment, clearly collecting his thoughts. "Back when I was still grinding, trying to make a name for myself in stand-up, I was broke. I mean flat broke. I had maybe $35 to my name. I was living out of my car, washing up in gas stations, eating whatever I could afford. And at one point, I was ready to give up. I had this voice in my head saying, maybe this just isn't for you. I even started thinking about going back to Cleveland, finding a job, any job, because the pain of failure was eating me up inside." The audience sat in silence, hanging on every word. "And then," Steve continued, "I got this phone call from a man I hadn't spoken to in years. He used to be a janitor at my high school, Mr. Peebles. Nobody really talked to him. Most people didn't even notice he was there. But he used to tell me every time he saw me walking to class, 'Don't lose that fire in your eyes, boy. You're gonna do something big one day.' And I'd just laugh, not really understanding what he meant." Steve wiped at his eyes again, clearly emotional. "That day when I was at my lowest, he called me, out of nowhere. He said, 'I heard from someone that you've been out in LA trying to make it. I just wanted to say, don't come back. Yet, you're too close. You've always been chosen for something bigger. Just hang in there.'" Steve looked at the audience, shaking his head with a soft smile. "I don't know how he knew. I don't know how he found my number, but I do know this, that one call stopped me from quitting. I pushed a little harder, got a gig the next week, and that one show led to everything else. Mr. Peebles never saw me on the big stage. He passed a year later, but his words stayed with me." Steve let the silence linger. "Sometimes the people who speak the loudest into your life aren't the ones with microphones or titles. Sometimes they're janitors, farmers, teachers, soldiers, or even a president in West Africa who sees you from across the world." He pointed to the camera, eyes full of conviction. "So if you've got something to say to someone, say it. Don't wait. Your words could be the only thing standing between them and giving up. You never know what that one moment of encouragement can do. I'm standing here today because of it." The studio erupted in applause, not just for the story, but for the truth behind it. The truth that encouragement, when given at the right time, can be the spark that lights the fire of destiny. And in that hour, Steve Harvey didn't just entertain, he taught, he healed, and he reminded everyone watching that no act of kindness, no word of faith ever goes to waste. As the applause died down and the atmosphere remained rich with reflection, Steve leaned back in his chair, a gentle smile on his face. You could see he wasn't done yet. Something else had surfaced in his memory. "You know," he began again, "there was another time I was reminded of how deeply connected we all really are, even when we don't realize it." The audience quieted once more. "This one happened just a couple of years ago. I was filming Family Feud overseas. We were in Africa, Ghana to be exact. Beautiful place, warm people, so full of pride and culture. And after filming, one day this young man comes up to me, real humble. Didn't ask for a selfie or an autograph. He just said, 'Mr. Harvey, do you have a moment? I need to tell you something.'" Steve paused, the emotion returning to his voice. "He tells me that he grew up in one of the poorest parts of Accra. His father passed away when he was a boy. His mother worked 3 jobs just to put food on the table. And every night they'd watch old YouTube clips of me. He said it wasn't the jokes that kept them going. It was hearing a black man speak with pride, with strength, with faith. He said I became a father figure in their home, without even knowing it." At this point, Steve looked visibly shaken, but he kept going. "He told me that because of those nights, those moments of laughter and encouragement, he decided he wouldn't give up on school. He went on to get a scholarship, studied hard. And that very day, the day he met me, he had just been accepted into a master's program in the UK, first in his entire neighborhood to ever do that." The audience began to cheer softly. "But then he said something that really hit me," Steve continued. "You saved my life," he said. and you never even knew I existed." Steve paused and looked around. "Man, how do you even respond to that?" I stood there trying to hold it together, but inside I was breaking down, not because I felt proud, but because I felt humbled, because I realized again that what we do in the dark, those private moments of honesty, of truth, they echo, far and wide, across oceans, into homes we'll never visit, into hearts we'll never meet. He nodded slowly, almost to himself. That day changed me. It reminded me that our influence is bigger than we think, that sometimes the seeds you plant aren't for your own harvest, but for someone else's survival. He leaned forward, locking eyes with the camera again. "So, to anyone watching this right now, if you've ever thought your story doesn't matter or that your struggle is pointless, I want you to remember that young man. I want you to remember Mr. Peebles. I want you to remember Ibrahim Traoré. People who spoke life, who lived purpose, and who changed the course of others by simply showing up." Steve let the moment breathe before ending with one final thought. You might not get to see the impact of your faithfulness, but that doesn't mean it didn't move mountains. And with that, he sat back, silent, his eyes glistening, the room holding its breath in reverence for the power of connection, of purpose, and of being seen. Steve Harvey took a slow sip of water, exhaled deeply, and looked out over the quiet studio audience. The atmosphere had shifted. It wasn't just a talk show anymore. It was a sanctuary for truth, resilience, and shared humanity. He leaned forward again, resting his elbows on the desk. "There's one more story I feel led to share with y'all," he said quietly. "It's not about a celebrity, not about fame or fortune. It's about a woman who taught me one of the greatest lessons of my life without ever saying a single word." The audience grew still once more. "This was back when I was hosting the Miss Universe pageant. Y'all remember that infamous moment," Steve said with a wry smile, referencing the time he mistakenly announced the wrong winner. There were a few chuckles, but Steve quickly returned to a serious tone. "Now listen, after that happened, I was devastated, embarrassed beyond belief. I went back to my hotel room and just collapsed in the chair. I kept thinking, God, why would you let that happen to me on live television? I was worried about my career, my name, my future. I felt humiliated. And while I was sitting there, completely broken, the phone in the room rings. Steve raised his eyebrows slightly, remembering the moment vividly. I pick up, and it's the hotel cleaning staff. This soft, quiet voice says, "Mr. Harvey, I know you're having a hard time. Can I bring you some tea?" He paused, letting the simplicity of those words sink in. I said yes. I didn't know why. Maybe because I just needed a moment of kindness. 10 minutes later, she comes in, this older woman, probably in her late 60s. She didn't ask for a photo, didn't try to give advice. She just walked in, placed the tea on the table, and then did something that nearly brought me to my knees. Steve's voice started to break again. She walked over, gently touched my shoulder, and whispered, "Sometimes the world breaks the wrong person, just to wake everybody else up." Then she turned and left. The entire room was silent. I never even got her name, Steve said softly. But I'll never forget her. That one sentence, man, it shook me to my soul. Because she was right. That moment of public failure, as painful as it was, ended up being the turning point in my life. It reminded me that humility isn't weakness. It's power under control. It reminded me to be grateful, not just when I'm on top, but when I'm being broken down too. He looked toward the audience with sincerity. And maybe, just maybe, that mistake wasn't about me at all. Maybe it was for someone watching who needed to see that you can fall in front of the whole world and still rise again. There were a few sniffles in the crowd. Steve sat back, his voice steadier now. So I say this to all of you. Don't be afraid of your broken moments. Don't be ashamed of your public losses. God can use even your embarrassment to elevate someone else. You just got to be willing to stand back up, dust yourself off, and keep walking in faith. He smiled then, genuinely, gently. That lady, with a tea? She might never know what she did for me, but in a world of noise and judgment, she chose compassion, and that made all the difference. The room was filled with heartfelt applause, not just for the story, but for the reminder that even in our worst moments there is grace, there is purpose, and there are angels among us.